James, welcome on to the Basketball Performance Podcast. I'm so excited to begin this episode because I have to say you are the only guest that I have trained personally when they were a professional basketball player. So welcome onto the podcast, my man.
Man, thank you. Thank you for having me. Great to be back connected with you.
I want, just before we go through the questions that I have for you, can you give our audience a little bit of background on yourself? Where you're from? How did you get into hoops? And then how did you make the transition into coaching?
Yeah. So originally from New York, started basketball at an early age. Thought myself to be good early. Moved to Atlanta, 8th grade, 7th grade, end of 7th grade, and hit a culture shock. Went from a selfish basketball player, that wanted to showboat and all these other kind of things, to moving to Georgia where we had a reserve coach from the Missouri area that wanted team system, team ball, and you were actually penalized and held accountable for not being able to fit in. Huge culture shock, but where it scared some guys off, it just intrigued me. My dad challenged me, my coach challenged me. And I think that's where I actually strived into becoming more of a team player, becoming a better player, understanding the sport, understanding the game better versus just hooping, So I got through high school. I grew a lot. 8th grade, I grew from 5'2" to 5'10". So I went on this growth spurt all the way through high school, finished high school at 6'4", continued growing in college to 6'6". I was young. I was 17 when I finished, a young 17 when I finished high school, but I grew late. All of my development was late. Went to a mid-major college, which was the best choice for me. Big schools would redshirt you. Ivy Leagues might not give you the best basketball. So going to a mid-major with some coaches that were really, really dedicated. Had a coach named Randy Peel that brought me in that first year, and then Fran McCaffrey came, who's now doing great things at Iowa. And, he just gave us the business side, taught us how to be professionals, taught us how to be overall good people, better people just in life, better fathers, better teammates, better colleagues, better brothers, better sons, all that kind of stuff. And it just helped me. He pushed development, pushed achievement, and a lot of guys from our school were fortunate enough to be able to turn professional basketball players. Then from there, it was just, sticking with the hard work, and had a chance to, be on 6 continents and play on, 20 different teams, and, win a little bit, lose a little bit, it took me to all parts of the world. So, basketball just kind of became my life. So as I was playing, I began to start developing guys back in 2008. Actually, it might have even been 2007. Came out of some camps and stuff, and guys, some professional players just kind of saw how I was put together, just from all of the experience that I was able to have with good coaching and mentorship and different things like that. So there were different things that guys saw in me, and they kind of began to trust me in helping to build their game and develop them as overall players in the sport. And it just grew from there. So as I played, I just gained more and more clientele throughout the summers. When I would come home, I'd be immediately on the clock, getting guys in the gym, had my share of good players from contacts and stuff I know, some McDonald's All-Americans, and and guys just continued to trust me, continued to build. So right when I finished playing, I got a chance to retire to an organization called the Skill Factory. Met Jeremiah Boswell a few years prior, and he works in the NBA office, and he understands pathway, and he had a great program set up, allowed me to be able to come in and run the pro side of his development with some structure, with some legitimacy, with logistics, management, managing staff and different things like this, just another step to allow me to be able to grow and in the space. And all of those different things led me to making it to, into the G League and NBA. A lot of people played a part. By no means did I do it alone. Um, work hard, and you find the right ways through the wrong ways, through making mistakes and stuff. You learn from it and you adjust and adapt. And fortunately for me, it's all paid off.
Absolutely. Now, since you coach at such a high level now, how has the game changed since when you played to where it is now? Let's talk about the game in general first.
Okay. The game in general is mostly for me. I feel like it went from positional to positionless. Um, Everybody had an A skill. They still do now.
Yep.
But the game was more sets, more coaches putting you together in sets and more robotic initially. Then you started getting to, okay, in these sets, let's get certain players to certain areas of the floor and start trusting their talent and stuff a little bit more, and then it became, okay, let's space the floor and start to trust everybody's talent. You remember back in the day, you could have one real franchise player, one good complement player, and everybody else were very limited. But now with positionless basketball, I mean, you have so many players with so many talents. The physicality in the game has changed, right? So it gives players a little bit more freedom and ability to attack and use their talents at another level. So now just the game is just open. It's just open. It's read, react, trusting your abilities, reading off your teammates, a lot of flexibility and a lot of adaptability.
So I would call that more conceptual approach, right? It's more like improv where you have to think on the fly. It's like you said, read and react. Do you think the game is going to be staying on that end, or do you think it might be swinging back a little bit more towards the sets because you're in the midst of it? So what are you seeing, James?
I see the game maintaining its speed and pace. For right now, the 3-point revolution is there. Obviously, the pace from the old Phoenix Suns is very prevalent.
Yep.
In basketball. But I do see a movement back of certain teams to continue to work for non-paint twos, right? That's been the analytical thing that we've been trying to eliminate from the game, is shooting these non-paint twos. You want to get to the rim, you want to get to the free throw line, you want to get threes. But if you look at the playoffs, and I always try to look at the playoffs to get a sense of where we are.
Yep.
Every team is working towards that, and they're bringing out their best basketball at that time. If you look at the physicality of the game, guys can't beat guys as easily off the dribble.
Sure.
So that leads to less shrinkage, less kickouts for threes, or if there are kickouts, there's shorter closeouts so that you can get back to them and take those threes away. I mean, if you look at the number of made threes in the game, made threes in the playoffs were considerably down than in the regular season. And that's every year mostly, but definitely if you look at this particular year. And so at the end of the day, taking those threes away are going to lead to more non-paint twos.
Yep.
So when you look in the playoffs, like, you have to have guys that can score and give them that space to be able to do that. I think that's where some teams are striving more, because that physicality and, and eating up that space and not being able to create as much of an advantage is forcing people now to have to score some non-paint twos.
Very interesting. So, but it's because they can, first of all, stroke the three at such a high clip where these opportunities come about. It's not like they just come about. It's because first of all, you are that skilled on the perimeter, where now you have to close out extra hard, and everybody has to close out more and more, like they're guarding Steph Curry, right? Where they have to run them off the line.
Right.
And therefore these mid-range shots are coming about. Is that what you're saying, James?
Yeah, well, the ability, because they stroke it so well at the three, everybody is trying to run faster, right?
Right.
Get down the court earlier, score early in transition, gain an advantage, keep an advantage.
Right.
What the physicality comes into play is, with physicality, you can't gain as much of an advantage. So it creates less help.
Yes.
So less help is going to be less threes.
Right.
Just because of the kickouts, and you're able to get there. And so now shot clock's winding down, right? You can't play with the ball all day. You have to be able to create and get to some areas to make some tough non-paint twos and things like that. And if you think about it, if you could effectively use the mid-range with certain players, key players we're talking about. I mean, the Kevin Durant's, the Kawhi Leonard's, these guys that really, really can score that thing in mid-range. Now people have to help. So that's another way to be able to create help. Every team is not going to go to that, but teams that have that type of ability and that type of talent can combat the physicality of the playoffs by getting to some non-paint twos where people feel like, okay, even though this guy is taking a non-paint two, which a lot of teams are forcing, we're going to have to send some help that way.
Yes.
Maybe a double team, right? You beat a guy off the dribble from the 3-point line, as athletic as the NBA is, you can catch up and make a defensive play.
Yes.
You make that same move at 18 feet, 17 feet, 15 feet, it's already a dunk.
Yeah.
Right? If you could beat them off a dribble, it's already a dunk. So, it's just another tool that I think some teams use, and I've seen some teams use it to create more complexity in the game for the defense.
So is the future of the G League and the NBA, I heard this on some, I can't remember which podcast, but a bunch of 6'9" guys running around shooting threes and being able to finish at the rim very, very well. What do you think of that? Is that the future of the league?
These players are skilled, man.
Yeah.
I mean, the skill level doesn't matter by height anymore. I mean, you have guys like Chet Holmgren that's coming out there, or the kid from France, Wembanyama, this kid's going between the legs, has he crossover, spinning the lane, dunk on your head. I mean, it just makes it's hard to guard. It's hard to guard. So when you have these guys at this length shooting from that range, you're not tall enough to get a hand up on it, right, to take it away. But you're also giving up that advantage at the rim because you got to have somebody with speed to be able to come from the help side and get to the rim quickly and protect it. Then you're swinging it again. Definitely the length and athleticism and the speed of the game and the ability of these guys is definitely a trend that I could see the NBA just going all the way towards.
So if you're working with, say, for example, a high school All-American, like you just mentioned before, are your workouts ensuring that they must be able to finish well at the rim and shoot threes to prepare them for that next level before, they get that open mid-range? What's your thought process there in terms of getting a very, very good high school player ready for the next level?
First thing is just the way you train them. I believe in training everybody to the highest level. Yep. High school guys don't work out shooting the high school line, work out shooting the longest line, which is the NBA line. Right. And learn and build all of that stuff early. In doing that, I think, especially with a high school guy, understanding how to get to the three. Sometimes you would think that, all right, we're just going to go out here and we're going to shoot a bunch of threes, right? Right. Mid-range shots are build-outs to three-pointers. So using the mid-range to effectively, just like when you start form shooting, right? You start right there at the rim, and you work on your form stuff, and then you progressively move out with different things. It's the same thing with skill building. Getting a dribble handoff and pulling up on a three-point line is a skill. So you can start working on that at 10 feet. Right. Even a dribble handoff, getting a pull-up, getting your body. It's an easier shot to make. You get a chance to give confidence to the player, let them grow that way, and then slowly move them out. But definitely, obviously building them out to that 3-point, you have to be able to, if you're a high school kid, you have to begin shooting that line, building the strength and consistency, knowing that that's where the game is going. When you can shoot it, you force tighter closeouts. Tighter closeouts is what's going to be able to give you the ability to get to the angle sometimes and get straight line drives to the rim. And then that's where the finishing comes in, understanding that at that high level, it's not just going to be drive and dunk. Can you finish on the first levels? Can you finish on the second level? Can you use both hands? Can you use both feet? Definitely very, very important parts of the game.
So when working, say, for example, for your skill sessions for guys in the G League, what are some of the things that you're doing in your skill sessions to get them to that next level? Obviously, it's going to be different from an individual basis, but would it be more raw skills like finishing and shooting, or do they already have that and they're working on more basketball IQ and concepts?
Depends on the player you have.
Yep.
You have some of these guys that can't finish, and it's not by lack of work, it's just lack of adversity on the court. You have
Right.
some of these guys are just athletic. So at the high school level, they're dunking on everybody. Or the high school level, they're getting open dunks, right? The college level, they're dunking on people, and you get to the NBA that level, and now you can't get to that dunk. And now you're forced to have to learn how to finish, and you
Right.
struggle to make it.
Right.
So some of it, I think, is awareness, learning the awareness that you're not going to be able to get there, but still being able to do it at speed. So what I mean is, an athletic guy, when he blows by somebody, the assumption should be that he's not going to get to the rim.
Okay.
But sometimes when you're so athletic, you assume that you are going to be able to get in the rim. Oh, I'm just going to be able to get there and dunk it. The assumption in the NBA, to me, should be that you're not going to get there.
Yes.
So now, how can you still attack at that speed and then be able to react off of it? Can you stop? Can you change direction? Can you now create a different angle out of the speed? And I think that's different things that we work on throughout, the G League and NBA is teaching guys how to create that space, how to use the screens effectively, every advantage you can to gain an advantage, to be able to get to the gaps. How fast can you get to them? Can you read a gap? Can you hold a gap? And then what can you do out of it? Do you understand the reads of the game, whether it's passing or changing an angle or creating another advantage from the first advantage as the weak side comes over? I think that's the bigger play. Of course, there's raw skill work. You continue with some ball handling, you continue with some form shooting, some passing, how quick you get the ball out your hand and different things like that. But it's application,
Right.
in the NBA is application. Drills are just drills if you can't apply it.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's where, at that level, it's really important is getting guys to actually apply these things in game effectively to raise the performance of the team, which is a big part of it. Is everything is about how can you raise the performance of the team and not just yourself.
Absolutely. And since you've been around that environment for a while now, what are some of the things that you're seeing and digging into that's getting you excited? Like maybe some of the things that you can learn more about that, that can take you to that next level as a coach.
For me, there's two things. I mean, there's other things as well.
Sure.
I can continue growth and learning in every area. But the sports science, I got a chance. I was fortunate enough to play in Australia one season and got a chance to experience sports science right away. The problem was at the time is that I didn't know a lot about sports science. So I really don't feel like I grasped everything that I probably could have by being there when I played there. Now I'm looking at, there's a ton of Australians doing great things. They're huge in sports science and sports performance. And I'm learning a lot more, and I'm in retrospect thinking about different things I did in Australia, and I'm understanding this stuff a little bit more. I just think it gives you a better outlook of where you can maximize your growth as far as effort goes, and still be effective. Not necessarily overdoing it, learning how to prevent injury, understanding what the proper amount of work is, and when to make changes. I think that's a huge part. As a former player, you have that. Well, when I was young, I just worked out all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but now these kids in AAU are playing, by the time they get to college, they played 150, 200 games of AAU that we didn't play.
Right.
We played this big tournament, that big tournament, summer's over.
Right.
So just understanding the body more. I love learning about the body and the sports performance part. I learn by listening and I learn by asking questions. I like being a devil advocate sometimes and just, challenging, because sometimes you get a different view of it, and a more honest view sometimes. The other thing I think are the analytics. Again, being a former player, a lot of guys have this tug of war with analytics and, don't shoot a mid-range. You got players are like, well, we should be shooting mid-ranges. Like, I played this game. Sometimes you got to shoot a mid-range, and you play back and forth with it. I think that's a big step for me, is learning the story behind the numbers. I think that's more of the important part of the growth, is understanding why you're chasing a certain number.
Right.
And on your team basis, not just on an NBA basis, but on your team basis, why are we chasing this particular number? What are the numbers we should be chasing based on the makeup of our team? And I mean, a lot of these NBA teams now have a great analytic department. In Brooklyn, we have a great analytic department. They're able to sit with you and tell you where the game is going, why we're doing what we're doing, why we're making the changes that we're making.
Yep.
And it just gives you a different view of, that number makes sense. And you just start to learn and think about and become more intrigued with certain numbers. Like, what does this number mean to us?
Yeah.
What is that? So those are the two areas for me, I think, of maximum growth right now, because of my interest in the space. You know what I mean? My interest and passion to learn the space helps drive how much you can learn. And right now in those two spaces, I'm very, very keyed in.
Right. That's so interesting, because I recently also, well, I'm personally in the sports science space, but also the analytics of the game, because I deal with the opposite spectrum of you. You're at that level, I'm at the youth level. I also look at the analytics, but sometimes, because my philosophy is we are developing young people. So it's not all about wins and losses for me. It's about getting them to a certain level. I will apply those analytics to my team, but then at the same time, you have to remember that you're dealing with people who you're trying to develop and getting those numbers up. Whereas if you're trying to win as many games as possible, then those analytics are like, okay, if I make this change, right, with this player whose effective field goal percentage is this, and it affects the team like that, then that change might be very, very relevant, right? But that, again, me digging into these analytics it's very, very interesting. So I'm totally like, that's something that we didn't have when we were growing up very much, right?
Right. And when I think about analytics, I just think about process. I'm a big believer in process. And step by step, that's something I had to do. I think just my whole career into basketball was step by step. Even, like I told you, coming from New York, thinking I was at the high and coming and they dropping me back to a low. Right. It's like, okay, how do we build this up? How do we not skip steps? So for me, it's like, if we're trying to go from a 6 to a 12 in something, like, I'm intrigued on how do we get to 7? And then I'm intrigued about how do we get to 8?
Right.
How do we stay at 8? How do we get to 9? And a lot of times, I always think there's two ways to look at it. We could keep looking at the 12 and complain about how we haven't gotten there, or we could look back at the 6 and just see how far we've come,
For sure.
So I always think that identity is like a huge part of the analytic game when you're trying to find these numbers. Is like, we have to know who we are. We have to know where we are so that we can differentiate it from what we're trying to get to. And sometimes I think it's also figuring out what's keeping us from the number versus always only understanding what's helping us get to the number. If that makes sense.
Absolutely.
What is keeping us from getting to this number?
Absolutely.
How do we eliminate those things?
Yeah. It's actually more, someone told me, a person said that skill is not always the addition of something, but sometimes it's the subtraction of something else that gets you a better result. So that's exactly what you're saying. I mean, James, you've been so generous with your time. I'm so grateful to be able to catch up with you, but just a couple more questions for you. Now that you are where you are, what's some advice that you would give younger coaches who are trying to get into the space that you're getting into?
Just continue to learn, obviously, continue to have the conversations. I think reading books is great. Watching is great. But it's the interaction, I think, that we can, grow the most from. You read a book, or if you just watch, you kind of pull things in your own terms. So for example, right, I speak Spanish. So if you're learning Spanish in school,
Yep.
which is coming from a book, you may learn one way to say it. If I'm in a certain country and I'm just watching and just listening to people talk, I'm going to learn one way to say it. Now, if I'm having conversation, I may be able to pull out from you a second or third way to say the same thing, just out of conversation, interacting with you, asking questions. If you don't understand something, now you get a second way, now you get a third way. So those are the things that I think are really, really important as far as, just learning and growing, is having those conversations, challenging thoughts, right? So you don't just hear it one way. Talking to as many people as you can, being on calls like this, podcasts, getting asked questions, being forced to think. I think that's the biggest mental stimulation that you could get that will help these guys, just grow. Because I really think that in coaching, and especially in development, you have to grow at your own terms. You have to grow within your own personality. That's a big thing that I say to even clients, even players, is you have to use your personality. Your personality is going to be your personality. We're all grown. We all come up a different way. We have different mentality. We've gone through, different challenges and face different obstacles, right? Different adversity. So I think that's a huge part of it is growing in your own space, but getting to ask the questions that you need to ask to get an understanding, or to get a view, or, see things from a certain lens.
Absolutely. Give yourself two pieces of advice. Give advice to a college version of yourself. What piece of advice would you have for that, James?
As a player, or as a coach?
As a player. So I'm sorry, as a player. So he's
As
like a relative, he's a freshman in college. What's some advice that you would give that, James?
College freshman James, I would actually say be less. It's hard to say that. I was so young as a freshman, so raw, very impressionable. So maybe be less impressionable, less worried about what the other guys have to say, and staying focused on what your goal is. During college, for me, I lost that along the way a little bit. I had frequent visits from my parents, especially my dad, coming up and making sure that I kind of got back on track. And it wasn't from outside, external influences as far as partying or anything like that, but just focusing on what your goal is and figuring out how you can use your present goal within your construct to get to what your ultimate goal is, and just staying on that path. I think that right now, college guys, and obviously I was in a different time, but it's even more prevalent now. Like I said, they face adversity and they transfer, or the ball's not given to them and they transfer. There's never an adaptation of, look, this is the goal we're trying to get through. These different things that we're fighting may be the things that's going to help us get to that goal. So I would say, even for myself, going through college, is understanding that pathway and where you have to adapt and adjust to give yourself the best chance at getting that goal. I got it throughout, but I definitely curved off a few times on that path.
How about some advice to the young, the new coach, like yourself, when you were first starting to coach?
Big picture. Just keep seeing the big picture. Very detailed and focused on a lot of small things. I say seeing the big picture within that. It's okay to see those smaller things, but continue to just kind of see the big picture. And I'm saying overall team picture, overall the whole construct of the mental part, the physical part, the emotional part. Just continuing to see that for everybody, I think, is a big piece as far as the coaching goes, because I think it drastically changes how you approach each day
Mhm.
and how you approach each individual to get the best out of them. I think that's a huge part of growth for any young coach. Just coming in, and big picture, it also has to do with getting information from a lot of different sources, different departments, and just continue to pull it all in and construct it into one full circle organization.
Absolutely. And last question, what's the impact that you want to have on the industry of basketball or the game of basketball?
I just want to be able to advance the game and stimulate the game. I've always been one to give back. I think that's how I got into development in the first place. I've always said that, like, if I could give everything I learned to a guy at a younger age than I learned it, right? Obviously, I learned stuff, still learning, but as a player, all the way through 14 years, I continue to learn. Well, in year 14, if I could give it to somebody that's in year one, or maybe they're not even in year one, maybe they're, high school, whatever it is, giving back. I got a chance when I was at the Skill Factory to do a little youth skills clinic with kids that were like 5, 6, and 7. And I remember starting it off, and I was like, man, I felt like I was babysitting for like the first week or so. 2 hours. 2 hours is a lot.
Trust me,
at that age, But as time went on, and I started to see the simple successes they were having,
yeah,
and the parents are coming in like, oh man, like he can shoot a left-handed layup, like he's jumping off the right foot, and at that level, you just see the impact a lot more. The people are just so grateful. So me, that's my passion, is just continue to give it back and I want everybody to have a long career. I was fortunate enough to play 14 years. I want everybody to be able to do that. And it's not just with basketball. It's just a dream in general. Like, as a parent, like, I want my kids to do what they want to do. And I want them to be able to get the best opportunities and the best growth and development into the area that they want to do. You know what I'm saying?
absolutely.
So that for me is the giving back and building from scratch and supporting a dream versus being stuck in a box. You see so many people having so much success nowadays by trusting their abilities and their talents and being able to, cultivate those things. I think that's, a huge part for players and coaches and people in general. So that's kind of like my passion, is to keep giving, as much as I know.
Absolutely. That's awesome. That's awesome. James, thank you so much for your time. I mean, you've been so generous. It's awesome to catch up with an old friend. And again, every time I talk to you, I'm enlightened and I learn so much. So thank you so much for coming onto the show.
No, thank you.
Just hold the line, James. And guys, we will see you next week.